listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent Talk.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is Monday night. What's the date? It's the 12th, I do believe. The 12th of April in 2021. I want to thank you for coming to the show. This is Scotty Roberts. And of course, you're watching the Intrepid radio program right here on the Odyssey Radio Network. That's ODYSY1.com. Come on over, see all the goodness that's Odyssey Radio. And at the same time, you can check out all the archives of this show, which we are not broadcasting live on Odyssey tonight. Same old story, different tune. When we're down in the makeshift studio in Louisiana, we're not set up to broadcast there, and so we've been a couple of months hiatus, but they've got over 500 archived shows that they've been playing of this program, so you can go over at any time, check out their schedule, see different times during the day, see what they're playing for the night, and hopefully soon we'll have that completely remedied. But for right now, I am back in the home studio up in Wisconsin, and it's nice to be home. But this is my last night home. And Rainey had the kids at Scouts tonight, so I figured I might as well just do a radio program. I wasn't going to do one tonight, and I won't be doing one tomorrow night, as I'll be arriving back in Louisiana at around 9 p.m. tomorrow night Central Standard Time. So I wanted to do a show tonight because I got the time to do it before everybody comes shambling into the door. And as you know, I have, those of you who are regular listeners, I have opened up I used to want to sequester myself on radio, away from the family, away from the noise and the din of the household, and, act like we're very professional coming from a professional studio. And while this is a studio that I try to be as professional as I can be with, it does at times, I've opened up the door and just let the family come right in. You've gotten to know my family, and that's part of the fun of doing the show. So I cannot predict what you may or may not hear on tonight's show as all the kids and Rainey start coming back home. It could be a free-for-all, a brouhaha, a screaming torrent. It could be, because, the little one, she's queen of the universe, and she likes to let everybody know. So she can be miserable sometimes. So everybody, Mike Yehudi, good to see you, brother. Yehudi! And Johan, Dancing Gypsy, good to see you. Delaney, good to see you. Looks like a lot of old regulars in here tonight. Doug Stack, glad you're here. Elder Barry, good to see you. Master Finn, I see that you've taken her out in ship-shape Bristol fashion tonight. And so I want to welcome you all here. Let's see, who else is here tonight? We got Teresa. Good to see you, Teresa. Steve Clark, nice to see you as well, brother. And let's see, did I miss anybody? Nope, not so far. So as people come in, if I see you, I'll say hi. If I don't, I won't. And that's the beauty of doing the live show. I can do that. And it's my show. I can take a minute or two to do that. So it's good to have you all here, and I appreciate it. This last weekend, I spent down at Eagle Creek Caves with my 11-year-old son, Flynn, and his Boy Scout troop. And Eagle Creek Caves, it's one of those big, massive, cavernous caves. Although it's not like some of the cathedral-style caves that I've seen, where it's got the 50, 60-foot ceilings. It wasn't quite that big, but it went in kind of flat areas and kept going underground and further down. And so we spent 2 nights in the cave with the troop. So we had about 20 guys, and 5 or 6 dads were there. No moms. So it would have been Rainey. If I hadn't been here, Rainey would have gone with Flynn, and so it would have been Rainey and 5 or 6 of the other dads, and that's always fun. And so they're used to her, and she's used to all of them. And so, but I got to go this time. That's especially why I came up here for this little excursion away from the makeshift studios and my makeshift life down in Louisiana. It was to see the family, and it was to take Flynn on his little cave venture this last weekend. So we had a good time. If you're on my Facebook, you saw a couple of pictures of that. But there's something that struck me while I was there, and it's something I have made mention of in the past, and that's why I have this show and the title I gave it tonight, For Cave Dwellers Only. And I've talked about this before, and it made me think of King David from the biblical text. Now, many of you have heard the series I did on King David. It was about 2 years ago now. But you can go into the archives here on my YouTube channel, go scroll down on my main page, and you'll see the King David series. And there was a time where David was dwelling in the cave of Adullam. Hey, Rainey.
Hey, Scotty.
And as we're starting to talk, just as I mentioned, my family's going to be wandering in. Come on over and say hi while you're here. Hey, Rainey.
Want to dwell in my cave?
What kind of question is that? Yes, I do.
All right.
As she brushes up against me
Yeah.
with her crush me to your bosom. So,
Right.
yeah, well, you all heard it here, folks, first. So anyway, how was Scouts tonight? And there's Rowan. Rowan has been here all evening.
Scouts
And,
was good.
There she is.
Ellie finished off her lion. She's now
Fantastic.
ready to be a tiger.
All right, she's a tiger now.
And they had AOL,
Oh, don't do that.
AOL voting for.
Let's get it out of Mom's face, maybe, huh?
You're going to be a tiger next.
Hi.
AOL
Oh, well,
voting
we got
for
the whole
West Ellie.
family here now. Looks like, except for Flynn. There's Ellie behind the microphone.
We're missing Lucy.
There you go.
Lucy's on the
So-
I don't know why I still have
We don't
my
need
mask
Lucy,
on. Yes, we
the
do.
dog.
She's part of the
So-
family.
Let's see, what do they say? You, Rainey, hardworking woman. Happy to meet you. That's Johan, dancing gypsy.
I am hardworking. Thank you for saying that.
She's very hardworking. You know what she got to do today?
Here. I got all the marks, which I'm sure people
Oh,
wondered
yeah.
what was up with me. Look at my marks.
Look at the tattoos.
Which way we got? We got to go this way.
Yeah.
Show them your legs.
No, I'm not showing them my legs.
Show me your legs. That's for
No.
Daddy when I get to be the cave dweller.
Yes,
She
in a few
just said.
minutes.
So,
Let me finish up.
okay, I'm going to have you get down and Mama's going to talk. So you guys go out. It's time for you to get ready for bed.
No.
Yeah, it is.
Never.
So see you.
Go brush your teeth.
So she had to have some tests done at the hospital today. Bye.
Bubbles.
So,
It was called an ENG.
ENG. Anybody know what that is? Anybody had that before? They shoved needles all up in all her arms and her legs and ankles.
At
And
first, it's electrocution.
yeah, mild electrocution.
They stick the little sticky tapes. That's where stick the little sticky tapes on things, and then they take this little two-prong thing
Move
and
this way just a little, then you're
they
not
jolt-
hidden by the logos over
they
there.
jolt electricity through
can't
to
move
see
anymore.
how your nerves and your muscles react. And it's light at first until they decide they need to do it more. And then something was wrong with this arm, so they had to do electricity all the way from my armpit to
Ah.
my hands. That was fun. And then he said, "We're almost done," and I was so excited. And then he said, "Okay, now we have the needles."
We're almost done with this. Now we can go with the needles.
Now
And
we're
they
gonna
shove
shove
needles
needles.
all up in her joints and ankles.
And
And
I don't think anybody can see it, but I know you can. There's there's marks.
again,
There's little tiny itty bitty pin pokes. There's needle pokes there, needle poke there, needle poke there, needle poke there, and all over my legs.
you smell like hospital stuff, or is it like
It's the soap from the church.
it's a new perfume called Eau de Mayo?
It's called church soap.
Church soap. There you go. So that was a fun experience for
That
her.
was very interesting.
So
And I laugh when I'm in pain, so I'm sure it was a fun experience for my neurologist because I laughed the whole time.
there you go. Not for me, but I hope I never have to have that done.
Yeah, me too, because it's
So-
terrible.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. So should I let you get back to serious stuff?
you could. You can stick around if you want to for a little bit.
I want to hear the story about the cave.
The cave. That's a private story. You can show me that later. Take me spelunking.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Let's see. Who just said? Steph said I had that. Yeah, you know the pain.
Yeah, you. Gross.
I still feel it. Sometimes my muscles are nerves. I don't even know what it is. I still feel that electricity jolt. And
So did James? James, did you have it done too? You said they did one full test, didn't like the results, did a second one, still didn't like the results, wanted a third. Oh, my aunt told the doctor insurance won't cover a third. He paid for it himself. Wow.
yeah.
It's done on the legs to check for neuropathy. I don't know about that. You don't have to check for neuropathy. I have neuropathy in my feet, and I know what that's like. So if the doc wants to say we want to check for your neuropathy, I'd say, hey, doc, you don't have to shove any needles in there. I can tell you there's neuropathy there. So, no, this is for something completely different. Nervous system stuff.
No,
So,
it's kind of the same.
oh, is it?
Yeah. And then I think it's also
So I didn't know that.
It's testing. Depending on how the testing turns out, they can tell if you have like the onset of MS too.
Oh, Steve said he had it done on his legs. Sorry. I'm just a little fuzzy. My glasses, I'm right in that middle zone here for reading. So
Yeah. I had it done on my legs and my arms. And I was told it was only going to be one leg. And he did them both. It was terrible.
Yikes. So she was really glad you said today. Because you know what it gets like when you're not doing nothing? Ladies, maybe some of you guys, I don't know, get around to not shaving your legs.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
You don't need to shave in the winter.
Yeah, that's right.
The best
Fuzzy
part
Wuzzy
too
was a bear.
was after it was all done, because my last appointment with him was over the computer and not in the office. He's like, what I need from you now is to stand up, stand on one leg and jump in a circle.
He had you do that?
Yeah. And I had to switch legs. And then I had to walk across the room because he had to check my balance and see.
I like making her stand on a leg and jump too. Oh, Daddy likes that.
Oh my
So, Steve, I do too. Something very similar to that. I don't know that it's all the way up to my knees, but there are some days it feels like I'm wearing socks and I'm barefoot. So, on other days, it feels almost normal, but not quite. So, it's weird. It's off and on. And it all depends on my circulation, blood sugar, all of that stuff factors in. Yep, for the neuropathy. Oh, Rainey, I love you, says Johan Dancing Gypsy.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Hey,
I love you too.
I love you too.
Oh, I love you too, Scotty.
Mm. I'm touching her butt though. And you're not.
Right?
Let's see. I had all those Tesca's stuff going on with me. I called it floppy feet. Yeah, it can feel that way sometimes. So far, I don't have that syndrome, but I don't like the not feeling my toes very well and my feet. So anyway, we'll move on from neuropathy
we can talk more.
nerve issues.
The nerve issues too can come from low ferritin or low iron in your blood. And my ferritin is at 10, and it's supposed to be, I think the normal range is supposed to be 90 to 200.
Wow. See, now, like my neuropathy, Steve was just saying nerves dying off caused by many things. Mine is primarily, I think, from diabetes. A lot of guys with diabetes will lose circulation in their toes. That's why you hear a lot of guys with diabetes, if they don't take care of it, they start losing toes, having toes amputated. Feet, legs,
eyes.
So far, I hope to never get to that spot. So, Steph, if I didn't say hello, welcome, by the way. Constantly got a rock on your shoe on your right foot. It's gross. Siani said, I had low iron and was sleepy all the time. Very low iron with this one.
I get to do iron infusions one of these days. I keep canceling my appointments because I'm scared.
Ryan Gale said, I can do that with a car battery for half price. Yes.
I'm coming to you next time,
That's
Ryan.
right, Ryan. And you're local.
Half
so
price. Woo.
Yeah, baby. If it's free, it's for me.
I know how to do it. We'll get it done for Scotty.
Yeah, there you go. There's some kind of acoustic wave stuff they can do supposedly too for blood vessels in neuropathy, feet if you have neuropathy. excuse me, we're talking here, baby.
You can take it out. I'll get it in the living room in a minute.
So, you know, who knows? Who knows what will work? Some say it's permanent. And maybe if you let it go too long, it becomes permanent. Sometimes it can be reversed. They used to say neuropathy was non-reversible. Whoa.
What the hell?
See, I'm barefoot and I had my foot. I'm leaning back on my stool to make room for Rainey, and my foot slipped, and I went this way.
Uh-huh.
And so it wasn't a total loss of balance, but that they're now saying you can reverse neuropathy, but you know, unless you permanently damaged something. So anyway, oh, Steve's was Agent Orange. Yuck. Yeah, really. Well,
yeah.
You know what? We're going to have Rainey back on Sunday. If you're not doing massages on Sunday morning.
Don't know.
So it's only Monday. It's Monday. Tomorrow I fly back to the godforsaken makeshift life down in the makeshift studio in the makeshift Louisiana.
Away from kids who make him crotchety and crabby.
Oh, the kids don't make me so crabby as it is. They're used to not having me tell them to do things. And if I tell our kids to do something, I expect it to be done. She's already laughing. And I'm like, I'll say to my son, I'm saying, didn't your mom just tell you to do that thing? Yeah. Well, why didn't you do it? My 11-year-old son, you know what his response was? I didn't want to.
You want to know why he's not doing it? Is because Dad's home and I can't shut off the internet. I'd shut that freaking internet off away.
She unplugs the internet.
That has done so much for everything. Oh, you don't want to do your chores? Okay. Ooh,
sorry, Doug.
What?
Sorry about that, Doug. Godforsaken. He said, peace out, Scotty. Scotty. You know I don't mean anything derogatory against you or any of my other Louisiana friends. So it is for me. It's only godforsaken because of my experience.
He just wants to be home.
I want to be home. I don't like being there. I don't like being away from home, as you all know. That's a broken record if I keep talking about that. So
I don't mind that Scotty's gone. I like having the house run by just me.
Yeah, I heard that.
No, you didn't.
Can I paint on this?
So,
not tonight. But in a little bit.
All right, bye. So I'll see you in a little bit. I'll be done.
Can you tell she's tired?
Yeah, I can.
All right. I'm going to take these. Oh,
all right.
And a big yawn. Take kids to bed. Have fun.
Oh, that was a big yawn.
Good night.
Johan says, Rainey, you're a superwoman. I'm so glad I finally got to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
She's amazing. Hi, you. This one's little mini Rainey. Are you like mini mom? Yeah. I'll be up in a while, okay? A little bit. You go up with mom. Nice.
Breakfast slushy. Dinner slushy.
Dinner slushy. Okay, you go up with mama.
Okay, there's
she's got her fake nails on. You might as well show your fake nails. She put those on last night, unsupervised. So she wore those to school today. I'm like, seriously?
She got them on last night, and Mom, I hear from the bathroom. What?
Oh, they're coming off.
Come wipe my butt.
She's like the fly. Yeah, I can't wipe my own butt now because of my fingernails. Oh.
So gross.
Okay, I'm going to put you to bed with mom. All right.
All right.
Good night, you.
I'm not going to bed.
Okay.
Good night,
you
everybody.
have fun not going to bed. Good night, baby. I'll see you in a little while.
We are not watching Victorious.
No.
Freak.
All right. You can close my door if you guys are going to yell. You can close my door. All right, guys. There it is. The familial interlude in tonight's show. I'm going to take a drink of water. They look beautiful, said Johan Dancing Gypsy. Thank you, brother. They are.
Oh, I'm running the box on the way out.
At least they aren't sick. That's true. Oh, oops. So, all right, folks. I'm going to make a dramatic shift in the show tonight. I entitled the show tonight, For Cave Dwellers Only. And this came on me as I was thinking about being down in the cave this weekend, in the caves with my son for his Boy Scout trip. And when I taught that series on David almost 2 years ago now, You can go see the archives of that if you want to listen back to that. I really approached King David from the Bible from a almost non-church, non-synagogue point of view. I wanted to look at him historically, but I also wanted to look at the pages of Scripture and try to find out what was the real story versus what was apologetic written about David. And I think we came out with some very different, a very different tale of David. And the tale of David, the true life story of a fictionalized hero, meaning he was a real guy, but there was a lot about him that was made up, I think. A lot about him that was embellished. A lot about him that was apologetic to make him the God-chosen king. And so, yet there is still elements of that story of David, I think, that ring true. Was he the sweet psalmist of Israel as the Bible portrays him? Was he a poet, a warrior poet? Was he one who wrote, who penned many of the Psalms? Well, there is. Hey, Audrey, good to see you. There is part of his story, I think, that rings very true. And there's an old sermon that I've taught, a lesson I taught back when I was a youth pastor. And we're talking back 35 years ago, talking about this stuff and studying David from a more biblical point of view. And I wanted to bring something up about him tonight. And David, when he was on the run from King Saul in the biblical account, it's said that he went to the cave of Adullam, Adullum. And this is a cave that is in the hills overlooking the valley of Elah, which is where the famous battle between David and Goliath, the Israelites and the Philistines, supposedly took place. And so all of you tonight, I see everybody, you're talking about things. I just saw Siani's post saying, I'm still fighting the cold. Steph has issues with some things. We all have issues with things. I'm seeing, Michelle is on the way home here soon. Oh, fantastic. Hey, Leslie, good to see you. And, you know, even Leslie and everybody here, we've all experienced things in the last year. And let's take COVID out of the picture. Just the things we've experienced, the things that I would call the things that drive us to the cave, the dwelling in the cave. Do you know, it was said of David, when you look at his Psalms, that there was a couple of years where he didn't write a single psalm. And he was living in the cave. He was on the run from King Saul. And of course, in the biblical story, I think the apologetic driven account, we're told that David, the picture that's painted is that David was being wrongfully accused by Saul. Saul knew he was going to become king, that the prophet had anointed him king in his place, and he was going to take out David, and Saul was losing his mind. Well, I think that's part of the apologetic of David, because there are many telltale signs within the story, within the history. If you just start taking apart the text, how David brought on himself much of what he was experiencing from Saul. He was an outlaw, and Saul was seeking his life because of the things David did. There were times even in the biblical stories where they're trying to show you these patriarchs who knew something, who were on God's team, so to speak, yet they were the ones too that made some of the biggest blunders and errors because of them either rushing their own agendas or having God tell them something through a prophet, and they tried to make that happen. And I think this is something David did. And there was one thing that David did, and we talked about this, we touched on this briefly a couple of weeks ago, but in the accounts of David where I talked about it, if you look back and listen to some of those, he really put himself in a position to be hunted down by King Saul. It wasn't because he was so righteous and Saul was so evil. It was that David did things that you just don't do. And any other Middle Eastern monarch in the making who did the things David did would have suffered some of the same consequences. And David slept with the wife of the king, King Saul. Now, this is something that's kept very quiet in the account, yet she is listed as one of his wives later in the story of David. And she is the woman that left with him when he ran. She is the woman that he had sex with, which in ancient Middle Eastern tradition and the way things were done, if you want to get your head lopped off or have yourself disemboweled really fast, the best way to do that is to sleep with one of the king's wives. And this is what David did. So taking all that part of the apologetic story, and let's push that aside. I was thinking about this whole thing about being in the cave. David was running from Saul, and he ended up in the cave. So David had absolutely bottomed out. Now you can look at it. Let's take the accounts that we've talked about the apologetic. Let's just put that aside. Let's just look at the character. Let's look at some of the biblical narrative about him. He had bottomed out. No matter what the cause, it was his own problem. How many of us are bottomed out or are hiding in the cave of life or have troubles because of actions we have committed by ourselves, by torrents or avalanches we've brought down on our own heads sometimes? Maybe not as grand thing come down on us because of the way we've acted. It isn't always just because somebody has done something to us. Sometimes there are events that happen. There's death, there's illness, there's loss of income, loss of job, there's loss of integrity, loss of standing. All of those things can be things that happen to us that we don't cause. Other things are things that maybe we have committed actions that leave us in those same positions. And we find ourselves in either case dwelling in the cave of life. This is where David was. No matter what the cause was, he had bottomed out, and here he was in the cave of Adullam. And in this downward swirl of events, he lost his position or his job, you could say. He lost his wife. He lost his home. He lost his counselor. He lost his closest friend. And finally, he lost his self-respect. And when the narrative last left David, before he became somebody dwelling in the cave of Adullam with some of his men that he had gathered to him, he was dribbling saliva down his beard, and he was scratching on the gate of the Philistine king, the enemy, like a madman. Realizing that his identity was known by the Philistines, he feigned insanity, and then he slipped out of the city of Gath. And once more, he was a man on the run. So you had David, who had to pretend to be a madman. He drools in his beard, because they're all, isn't this King David, the great slayer of Goliath of Gath and all these things? And they thought they had him under their thumb, and then he portrayed the madman and he ran away. Think of the loss of self-dignity, that the only way you save your life is to act that way. And of course, those are different times. Siani, we all sometimes need that cave to escape to, and sometimes we need it to run to. Other times we're forced there. And David departed from there, and he escaped to the cave of Adullam, is the verse in 1 Samuel that comes after that scene where he had to drool and pretend he was a madman. And this was the lowest moment of David's life to date in the biblical account. And if you want to know how he really felt, if you want to know what he was feeling at this time, if this is truly a psalm of David, it's ascribed to him, just read the song he composed about this period in his life. This is Psalm 142. He had no security. He had no food. He had no one to talk to. He had no promises left to cling to. And he had no hope that anything was ever going to change. And he was alone in a dark, dank cave. And he was away from everything and everybody he once knew and everybody he loved. Everybody except God for him. And it's no wonder he wrote this baleful song of sorrow. Look it up sometime. Look up in a Bible. Look up the book of Psalms and look up Psalm 142. I'm going to read it for you here. And this is what David was feeling. Now, the cave can be, in his case, it was literal. I'm talking about the caves that we find ourselves in because of experiences in life, losses in life. Remember, like I said, he had nothing. He had no security. He had no job. He had no friends. He had no food. He was outcast, outlawed. The king wanted his life. No one to talk to. No promises to cling to anymore. I think you have to think he was starting to wonder, what's going to happen to me even after all these promises I was given by God that I was going to be this amazing king. He was alone in a dark cave. You ever find yourself there? He wrote this song. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaints before him. I declare my troubles before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, you knew my path. In the way where I walk, they've hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, for there's no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. No one cares for my soul. I cried out to God, and I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Give heed to my cry, for I'm brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they're too strong for me. Bring my soul out of prison, so that I may give thanks to your name. The righteous will surround me, for you will deal bountifully with me. End of the psalm. This is what David wrote. That's the way David felt as a cave dweller. And I don't know of a soul on earth who cares for my soul, he said. I'm brought very low. Deliver me, God. Can you feel the loneliness of that desolate spot? The dampness of that cave? I just slept in a cave for 2 nights in a row with my son. And it was a wet, muddy cave. The mud was, red, yellowish red clay. And we found dry spot. We put down tarps and we had an air mattress, thank goodness. Rainey packed all this stuff in a tub for us and sent it all along. And I'm opening holy crap, she provided for us. And we slept in our sleeping bags. It was cool. It was a constant 55 or 57 degrees down there. And you turn out the lights and it was pitch black. I don't know how far underground we were, but it took a while to get down to the bottom. We went down to the bottoms of the cave where we camped out. And so could you imagine? Can you feel that desolate spot? Are you feeling it now? Are you there? Do you feel the cave dwelling? Do you feel the walls of the cave around you? The closed off from other people, the closed off from everything you once knew. And nobody is there. Steph said, that'd be good for your skin though, Scotty. Soft as a baby's bottom. Yeah, it would be. If you wanted to roll around naked and that stuff for a while, yeah, maybe you'd come out with some supple skin. I know my clothes were caked in this stuff on the way back. So maybe my clothes will do well. So I'm just looking at some of the comments. Hey, Beth, good to see you. So all of us, in one respect or another, I am going to assume, have experienced this life in a cave. Not the literal cave, the metaphoric cave, where you feel closed off to everyone. And it was like David said. He says, I'm pouring out my complaint to God. I declare my trouble before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed inside me, you knew my path and the way where I walk. They've hidden a trap for me. There is no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. So it's this cave of despair. And so can you feel that loneliness? Have you felt that kind of loneliness before? Where you feel like, I got nothing right now. This is what being in that cave over the weekend made me think of. Just sitting day after day. I think it was 11 months or something like that that David lived in this cave, in hiding. He'd lost everything. Sure, some of it by his own hand, but he had lost everything. And in the midst of all this, you can feel David's despair, the depths to which his life had sunk. And there was no escape. There was nothing left. He had nothing. Now, maybe some of us aren't that far down in the metaphoric cave of life, but many times we find ourselves dwelling there. And I don't speak about this as somebody who's easily discouraged or easily depressed or things like that. Although I could only imagine that people who suffer from depression might feel this kind of thing pretty heavily. Doug says, I got nothing right now. But I know, he said, but I know I have a lot. But right now I feel like nothing right now. Doug, that's that feeling, being in the cave. That's the way David felt. And again, we've talked about the apologetic of David, where I don't think he was as nice a guy as the Bible likes to paint him, or some of the authors in the Bible like to paint him. But he brought a lot of things on himself. And yet in the midst of all this, David never lost his sight of what to him was very real, and that was God. He cries out for God to deliver him. Have you ever done that? Have you ever said, on the outside, I carry on my life, I conduct myself as if I am the master of my fate. Yet when we find ourselves in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. No, I'm kidding. It's the Beatles song. And just when we find ourselves in trouble or turmoil or loss or nowhere else to go, many times that's the first thing we do is we turn to God. God, if you're there, help me out. Throw me a bone. Or I said that to God once about 15 plus years ago. It was before I met Rainey, just before. And I was in a situation, I said, God, just throw me a bone. Give me something. And I got this answer in my head that kept saying, and I don't know what to do with this because I live as a practical agnostic. But in my head, I got this immediate answer. I don't really need to throw you a bone. You know everything you need to know already. You're in the cave because you've chosen to be there. Because you can get yourself out. So this is where we catch sight of the heart of David, that inward place that only God can truly see in any of us, our God. I don't know who you call your God, but say for practical application here, we'll just talk God. It's that part that God sees, that unseen quality that God saw in David when he chose him as a young boy in Bethlehem to be the next king after Saul. And the challenge and what it involved was that David had been brought to the place where God can truly begin to shape him and use him. And when the sovereign God brings us to nothing, it is to reroute our lives, not to end them. And these are the places I stumble a lot in life. I stumble in not my understanding, but in my appropriation of. That is God there, like we were taught, with open arms to take my messes and to take me as I am? Is it only me denying that God exists in one form that I was taught that helps me keep denying that presence being there? Don't know for sure. There was an old song when I was in my college days that talked about when we face some of these things, these cave-dwelling experiences, that the chorus said something like, I trust in the Lord, for he makes no mistake. He knows the end of each path that I take. For when I am and purified, I shall come forth as gold. And you can take the experiences you have. You can take the deities you wish to believe or not believe in. You can take your experiences and say, you can de-spiritualize them a bit and just say, these are the things that happen to me that mold me into who I am supposed to be. These are the things that, like when I was going through, and I've told this longer version of this story, but when my ex-wife disappeared with my then 3-year-old twin daughters, who are now 29, this is 26 years ago. She disappeared. I couldn't find them. She was making spurious claims against me and charges. And I remember told you the longer versions of these stories when they were appropriate to tell them. And I said, why is she doing this? If she wants a divorce, why doesn't she just get a divorce? Why would she be making these claims? And I remember I was in despair. And there was one day where I was in that cave. And I said to God, who I wasn't even sure if I believed in anymore. And I took a Bible out and I said, God, I'm going to put my finger in. I said, I hate these kinds of stories. I don't like laying out the fleece for God. Hey, God, there's the fleece. Make sure if it's wet on one side and dry on the other, then this must be your will. Now do that again. I don't put God to the test like that. God, if you're really God, make my orange sock turn green. Stuff like that. If you're really God, you have the power to do that, right? But I said, I'm going to open up my Bible and just stick my finger in. And where it lands, I'm going to ask that you show me something that you want me to know. And so I flipped it open and I was looking up with my eyes closed like this, and I flipped it open. I just stuck my finger in and I looked, and it was the book of James in the New Testament, chapter 1. And I may have recited this to some of you before, but I'll paraphrase it because I don't know I don't have it exactly memorized, and I memorized it in a modern idiom as opposed to like the King James version. But he said, when many of you find yourselves in the midst of tests and tribulations and trials, consider it pure joy. because that's when your faith life is forced out into the open to show its true colors. And if any of you is lacking wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to everybody without holding back. Now plug in God as you understand him. Gives without holding back. But when you ask, don't ask doubting, because anybody who asks doubting will be like a wave of the sea that's driven by the wind and tossed. Don't expect that God's going to come in and work a miracle on top of that. But ask boldly, believingly, and you'll arrive at what you need. This is, I think, the intent and the visualization of prayer. So this is what I did during that time. And still today, 26 years later, I hail back to that incident and say, I question God, I question the things I was taught, but I don't question that there was power in that passage that I was led to. So, human perspective says that when David's been brought to this place where God can truly begin to shape him and use him, when the sovereign God brought him to nothing, to rock bottom, it's to reroute him. It's not to end his life. It's to rewire him. Human perspective says, aha, you've lost this, you've lost that. You've caused this, you've caused that. You've ruined this, you've ruined that. This has happened to you. That has happened to you. Maybe it's a good time to just end it all and stop. But something I learned in this passage with David is that God said to him, no, you're in the cave. But that doesn't mean it's the end of life for you. It means it's time to reroute your life. Now's the time to start afresh and start anew. And that's exactly what he did with David. Maybe a little different message than you need to hear. But sometimes the cave is there to reroute us, to rewire us, put us on a new path. David hangs out no shingles. He advertises no need except to God. He's alone in a cave. And look what God did. Look who came to join him. It says when David's alone in this cave and he's dwelling there for months. It says when his brothers and all his father's household heard of it, David's escaped to the cave and hiding in the cave, they went down there to him. Now remember, it hasn't really been all that long since David's family didn't pay any attention to him at all. His own father had almost forgotten he existed when the prophet Samuel came and asked, do you have sons? One of your sons. God wants me to anoint one of them. And his dad was like, oh yeah, there's David. He's out with the sheep. And he sends one of his other sons to go fetch him. And are these all your sons? Samuel said. And Jesse, David's father, snapped his fingers. It was like, oh yeah. I've got one son. He's up in the hills. And later, when he went to the battle and was going to take up arms against Goliath, his brothers put him down. In the passage, it said they chided him. We know how you're really here. You just want to be seen. You want to be part of the action. But here, in the cave, David is broken. He's at the end. He's without crutches. He's crushed in spirit. And would you look who comes to him? Those same brothers and his father, along with the rest of the household. So sometimes when you're in the cave, you don't want other people around. Sometimes you just can't stand to be with people, even the people that you know in your heart of hearts love you and care about you. You just don't want them around. You're alone and you hate that, but you also don't want to share the space with anyone. You hate to admit it publicly. And in fact, you usually don't, but it's true. Sometimes you just want to be alone. And I have a feeling that at that moment in David's life, as the cave dweller, David wanted nobody around. He didn't write Psalms during that period. Because if he wasn't worth anything to himself, he didn't see his worth to anybody else. Have you ever been there? All of you guys in the chat room that are talking, all of you listening to my voice, have you been in that situation where you just say, I'm not worth anything to myself? You're not throwing a pity party. You're not crying in your soup. You're just saying, if I'm not worth anything to myself, I certainly am not worth anything to anybody else. Right, Teresa? It's very true. David didn't want his family, but you know what? They came. Look at our family here in this chat room. How many of us would love to unload on the family in this chat room and we stop? If I'm not worth anything to myself, I'm certainly not worth anything to them. Yet look at the family that's there, that comes to you when you need them. Call it corny, but what pops in my head, I've gotten very used to when things come to my head, I have to say them. They're there for a reason. They're brought to my mind for a reason. When my mom was shot by her estranged husband, and she lived, and he was a fugitive for almost a year. I remember she ran a karaoke business, and she had friends that loved her and cared about her. And they came to see her, and they threw a fundraiser for her to pay hospital bills and things like that. And there was a guy who sang a song, and you all know the song. You've heard it before. That song by, I think it's Alabama. That's what comes to my mind. I think I'm right on that, Alabama. That I believe there are angels around us. I can't remember what it's called, but the exact title. But in the chorus, it's, I believe there are angels around us. Sent down to us from somewhere up above. They come to you and me in our darkest hours to show us how to live, teach us how to give, to shine their light all over the world. And I think I have all those words right. But what always used to get to me in that song was, I believe there are angels all around us. You can call them angels. You can call them spirits. You can call them messengers of God, which is what an angel is. You can call them something completely different, but so I believe there are angels around us sent down to us from somewhere up above. They come to you and me in our darkest hours. And I think this is what David felt. He didn't want his family around him, but they came. He didn't want them there. God brought him there anyway. They crawled right into that cave with him, but look, they weren't the only ones who came. It says in 1 Samuel 22, verse 2, and everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to David, and he became captain over them. Now there were about 400 men with him. And their base of operations? The Cave of Adullam, which you can still go visit this cave today. Now, the big question you could ask is this all true? Is this how David was? Because remember, I think there were a lot of things about David that made him a very foul human being. And there was a lot of apologetic written about him. That's very clear to see. But was he a man after God's own heart, as the Bible says, or a man who meant the meaning of that, a man who chased after the heart of God? Was he the sweet psalmist of Israel, the poet? Could you be a man who did great evil, who brought calamity on himself, who rose himself to great power, and eventually lost everything, all of his sons, and died an unhappy, bitter man? Probably not somebody we would have liked very much. But can you be a person like that and still in your heart of hearts say, I need to reach out to God. I'm in the cave. David did this. And what a group came to him. Everyone who was in distress, it says, came to David. The hero is Zuk. And it means not only in distress, but under pressure, under stress. So here came hundreds of stressed out, pressured people to David. Second, it says everyone who was in debt made their way there. And the Hebrew here, nashah, means to lend on interest, to have a number of creditors. So these were people who couldn't pay their bills, people who were bankrupt. And you know what happened back then? More ancient times, less civilized culture. What would happen to you? You could get a hand cut off. You could get thrown in debtor's prison. You could lose your life. You could lose everything you have. So the people who were in debt also came to David. Third, here comes everyone who was discontented, the verse says. And the Hebrew here, ma'ar nefesh. Ma'ar nefesh. It means to be in bitterness of soul, to have been wronged and mistreated. It says that group came to David too. What does all this mean? He's in this cave and he's living alone. He's dwelling alone. He's got nothing and no one. And now he's surrounded by 400 people. What does all this mean? Well, in that day, the land was aching under the rule of Saul, oppressed by the Philistines. He had overtaxed the people. He had mistreated them. We're talking about Saul. He was, according to the biblical, the apologist, I doubt some of this, but in the storyline, he was a madman. He was given to intense depression. And they were suffering the consequences. And some couldn't stand it any longer. So David ended up with a cave full of malcontents. Can you imagine that? It's bad enough to be in there alone, feeling like you're a worm, like you've got nothing, but to have over 400 more worms crawl in there with you. What a mess. This is where I likened David in some of my evaluations of him to be a lot like an ancient Robin Hood. He was outlawed by the king, ran to the greenwood, the hills of Judea, hid in the cave of Adullam, gathered to himself everyone who was stressed, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was a malcontent, and they became his mighty men of valor. But you could say that God was kind of at work here in David's life. He's rerouting David's life Sure, the man is in the cave. Sure, he feels worthless. He feels useless. He feels mistreated. He feels misunderstood. And that's why he's in the cave in the first place. And before he can spit, his brothers come. His dad comes. His family comes. Then before he can find them a place to sit down, strangers of all sorts begin to drop in. I don't know how the word traveled around, but before long there were 400 people dwelling in that cave with David, looking to him as their leader. That cave was no longer David's escape hatch. That cave of his despair, if you can believe it, this smelly, dank cave became a place of training for those who were the beginning of the army that would be called David's mighty men of valor. That's right. It was this motley crew would become his mighty men in battle. And later they would become his cabinet when he took office. He turned their lives around and built into them order and discipline and character and direction. Now, one thing you can say for sure, whether you think David was this puritanical man or David was this man who wasn't such a nice guy, but did seek after God, he did do one thing. He built an army of men that were loyal to him. David was beaten all the way down until there was no way to look but up. And when he looked up, God was there. And he brought this bunch of unknowns to David, little by little, until finally they proved themselves to be the mightiest men of Israel. Wow. That's mind-blowing to me. It's like, look at us here in this group. Those of us who gather the inner core of people who care about everybody else that's here. Are we brought to each other one by one, little by little? This didn't happen in one day. What a turning point in David's life this had to be. When he made this crucial decision to not walk away, he would accept his situation. He'd make the best of it. If it was in a cave, so be it. And if those around him needed leadership, he'd provide it. Who would have ever guessed that the next king of Israel at that time was training his troops in a cave where nobody saw and nobody cared? How unusual of God. Yet how carefully planned it seemed. David became, as I said, this sort of Robin Hood. His Sherwood Forest was the rugged Judean wilderness, with its mountains and its caves and deep wadis. There, he commanded a group of mavericks because God wanted him to become a maverick king. That's the way we're taught this passage, or this story about David anyway. Israel would never see another king like David. He was a bit like the Arthurian legends as well. All these heroic swaths throughout history and the stories, the great mythic heroic, they all had these similar things. King Arthur was a Welsh clan chieftain who unified his clans from out of the Welsh wilderness and became the High King of Britain, according to the legend. So we looked at Psalm 142, what David wrote. Now I want to look at two others. I know we're running over time, and I hope you're okay with that. Siani has to get back to work. I just see that. I've seen that. Have a good night, Siani. Thanks for being here. Matt Finn says, a man brought to despair in order to be rebuilt in the eyes of the Lord. Exactly. I want to look at two other Psalms, Psalm 57 and Psalm 34 here. We don't know in what order David wrote these Psalms, but they are attributed to him. But looking at his life, they seem to fit in this kind of backward order. 142 came first, the one I read at the beginning, when he was at his lowest moment on his face. Psalm 57 when he's on his knees. And finally, Psalm 34 when he's on his feet. And notice at Psalm 57, it's entitled A Miktam of David. M-I-K-H-T-A-M. A Miktam of David, when he fled from Saul in the cave. That's the title in the ancient manuscript. Psalm 57, a Miktam of David when he fled from Saul in the cave. And the description line at the beginning of many of the Psalms gives you their author and their context. And David writes this in Psalm 57. Be gracious to me, O God. Be gracious to me, for my soul takes refuge in you. And in the shadow of your wings, I will take refuge. Until destruction passes by, I will cry to God Most High, to God who accomplishes all things for me. He will send from heaven and save me. That's verses 1 to 3 of Psalm 57. At this point, David is on his knees. He's still down, but at least he's looking up. He's no longer just looking within. And then he says, my soul is among lions. I must lie among those who breathe forth fire, even the sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows and their tongue a sharp sword. Now this sounds as though it was written when the strangers began to crowd into the cave. If you've ever worked with malcontents before, you know that that's true. They're a thankless, coarse, thoughtless body of people. So their own concerns and their own needs that they don't pay much attention to anybody else or anybody else's needs. And so David says to God in that psalm, be exalted above the heavens, O God. My heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing, yes, I will sing praises. Be exalted above the heavens, O God. Let your glory be above all the earth. So see where David's eyes are now? O God, you be exalted, he's saying. In Psalm 142, he was saying, I'm in the cave. I'm at the end. There's no one on the right hand or the left. I have no one who cares. And now in Psalm 57, he says, now you be gracious to me, God. I'm stretched. I'm pulled beyond my limits. You meet my needs. He's crying out his declaration of dependence, his declaration of dependence on God. Now look at Psalm 34, which I believe is the third psalm he wrote while in the cave. And what a difference, what a change has come over David. He says, I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. That was verse 1 of the psalm. Later we learn that David's men became acutely able with the sword and with the bow and with the arrow. And obviously they had all these training practices stationed there, their headquarters, the cave of Adullam. They learned how to get their act together in battle. They developed discipline in the ranks. They might have been mavericks, but they were on their way to becoming skilled hunters and courageous fighters. So David, seeing his men marching in step, using the sword and the spear and the bow with skill, says to them, magnify the Lord with me. Let us exalt his name together. He's turning their eyes to God. I sought the Lord and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Is this a little too preachy for you? A little too biblical for you? This is what it says David wrote during this time period. To the distressed among the group, he says, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. I hear so much teaching about the Lord and how the Lord is this evil thing. And we twist these things, and I don't think that's who the Lord is at all. Although I have my doubts about things, there are things that I think are pretty clear in the text. Taste and see that the Lord is good. How blessed is the man who takes refuge in God, David says. To those in debt, he says, oh, fear the Lord, you, his saints, for to those who fear him there is no want. To the discontented, he says, the young lions do lack and suffer hunger, but they who seek the Lord shall not be in want of any good thing. And finally, he gives sort of a wrap-up lesson to the entire group. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. Dark and lonely are the caves of the righteous. But the Lord delivers him out of them all. So the change, why did it occur? Why did this change happen to the cave dweller? What possible application could that be to any of us who have our times in the cave? Why did such a major change take place in David's life and attitude? First, because David hurt enough to admit his need. He hurt enough to admit his need. When you're hurting, you have to declare it to someone, especially God, your God. David hurt enough to admit his needs. There was this account I heard a long time ago of a man, and his attempt to get a group of 14 men and women in the church to communicate with one another at more than a superficial level. Many of these people had been attending the same church for years without knowing anybody else's personal feelings. Anything. You ever been to a church gathering like that, a synagogue gathering like that? You've been there, going there for years, and you don't know these people. In an effort to help them, this guy learned how to help them learn how to communicate with each other at a deeper level. He suggested that various individuals in the group relate some of their incidents from their past that had helped them form their personalities. And much to his disappointment, every one of the 14 related only positive experiences and feelings. And near the end of the session, however, one young woman began pouring out her feelings of insecurity, inferiority, despair. She concluded by stating that all she wanted was that the other people in the group, people in the group she perceived they already had. And the man said, we sat there stunned by the reality which had drawn us irresistibly toward this thin, totally unprotected young woman. It was we who needed what she had. The ability to be open, to be personal, to be honest in a vulnerable way. And as I looked around the group, I knew that somehow, because this theologically unsophisticated, honest woman had turned loose her silence and her pride and had reached out in total honesty, that it was safe for the rest of us to start becoming one with each other. David hurt enough to admit his need. Second, David was honest enough to cry for help. We've lived under such a veneer for so long in our generation that we hardly know how to cry for help. But God honors, I think, such vulnerability. Call it God, call it Spirit, call it the universe, call it Creator, call it Originator. He honors, as an easy way to say it, there's an honor of vulnerability. He did then with David, he does it with us now. And third, David was humble enough to learn from God. How tragic it is that we can live in one cave after another, and never learn from God, from the universe. Never learn the lesson that we're there to learn. We reject the idea, the very notion that somebody bigger or greater or more sovereign or more deified, if you will, than us could possibly be teaching us something. But David didn't do that. And I love if this is truly who David was in his heart of hearts, I love this man's humility. If it's to be in a cave, then let's not fight it. We'll turn it into a training ground for the future. As I look at this time in David's life, I can't help but reflect on all the lessons that we have that we can learn. All the glories of the universe and heaven that we can learn from fellow malcontents and needy people like us. Some of us are living right now in an emotional cave where it's dark and dismal, it's damp, it's disillusioning. And perhaps the hardest part of all of this is that we can't declare the truth to anyone else because it's so desperate and so lonely. We can't declare what we know to be truth because we're desperate and lonely. I weary of the philosophy that life is just one silver line cloud after another, especially if you're like a Christian or somebody who is spiritually sound. Life is a moonbeam, just soaring, but it's not. Sometimes life includes a deep, dark cave. Remember, the conversation of a soul is the miracle of a moment, but the making of a saint is the task of a lifetime. I used to say, God doesn't care about time, not concerned with how long things take. And of course, remember, this was from my perspective of who I thought God really was. And I said this a long time ago. I said, God doesn't care how long it takes. But he isn't going to give up on us, is the idea. He, she, it, they. I remember I wrote something a very long time ago, and I've said it on this show before in context. I wrote, and I found it in an old notebook of mine from, 30 years ago. And it said, God wrestles with us in the night times of our lives, but at daybreak, he's gone. That's life in the cave. Sometimes life feels like a dry, barren wind off of a lonely desert. Something inside us begins to wilt away. At other times, it feels more like a chilling mist seeping through our pores, and it numbs our spirit. It fogs the path before us. What is it about discouragement that strips our lives of joy and leaves us feeling absolutely vulnerable and exposed? Well, I don't know about all the reasons. I don't even know most of the reasons, but I do know one of the reasons we don't have a refuge. Think about that for a second. We don't have a refuge. Shelters are hard to come by. Yet we all need harbors to pull into when we feel weather-torn and blasted. An old friend once said, I ain't got nobody to admit my faults to. I have to have them put their arms around me and tell me I'm still okay. It's a real guy who said this. My stomach churns when I hear that, not because it shocks me, but because I really had to agree. We all need a refuge. We all need someone to hear us out. Where do you turn when the bottom drops out of your life? And I ask you that. Or when you face an issue that's embarrassing or hurtful or damning or of your own hands, maybe even scandalous, where do you turn? You need a shelter, a listener, someone who understands. You need a cave to duck into sometimes. But to whom do you turn when there's no one to tell your troubles to? Where do you find encouragement? David was a guy just like that, I think. He turned to the living God as he knew him and understood him, and found in him a place to rest and repair. Again, replace that Old Testament God with the God that you believe is there. Cornered, bruised by adversity, struggling with discouragement and despair, he wrote these words in his journal of woes. In thee, O Lord, have I taken refuge. That's Psalm 31:1. Failing in strength, wounded in spirit, David cries out in his need for a refuge. The Hebrew term speaks of a protective place, a place of safety and security and secrecy. He tells God that he, Jehovah God, became his refuge. In him, the troubled man found encouragement. And now, a final, as we wrap this up, I'm way over time. Sorry, I hope this is meaningful stuff. But an all-important question I have to ask, and ask of you. Why do we need a refuge? In Psalm 31, I found at least 3 answers to that question. First, we need a refuge because we are in distress and sorrow accompanies us. You know those feelings. Don't say you don't. Your eyes get red from weeping. The heavy weights of sorrow press down. You know, I sit here, I'm talking through this whole thing tonight, and at times I struggle with the emotion that's below the surface. Why? Do it because I want to be emotional? No, because it's stuff we all experience. And it's below the surface, right below the surface sometimes. Depression, discouragement, that serpent of despair slithers silently through the soul's back door. That's when we need a refuge. Second, also we need a refuge because we are people who understand that our own guilt accuses us sometimes. There's a lot of pain woven through those words, a lot of embarrassment. Feelings like, it's my fault. I caused this. What tough words to choke out. I'm to blame. Harried and haunted by self-infliction of sorrow. We desperately search for a place to hide, but sometimes the most devastating blow of all is dealt by other people. And that brings us to the third reason that we need a refuge. We need a refuge because we're surrounded by adversaries and misunderstanding assaults us. tortured by the whisperings of others. We feel like a wounded, bleeding mouse in the paws of a hungry cat. And the thought of what people are saying is more than we can bear sometimes. Gossip, even its name hisses gossip, gives you the final shove as we strive for survival at the ragged edge of despair. So, discouraged people don't need critics. They heard enough already. They don't need more guilt or piled on distress. They need encouragement, a word. They need a refuge. They need a family that comes to see them when they're hurting. They need to be surrounded by malcontents sometimes to figure out what it means to not be malcontent. They need a place to hide and heal, a willing, caring, available someone, a confidant, a comrade at arms. You can't find one? Well, look what David said. He said, who was his shelter? He said, my strength, my mighty rock, my stronghold, my high tower. He turned to the Almighty. So, folks, I don't know where you are in your life, but it occurred to me again. I'll just say, like I said at the beginning, I was in that cave all weekend with my son, and these thoughts came to my mind. Is that it means to a cave? Take this and what's the word I'm looking for? Make it not literal, but metaphoric. And by living in that cave, we sometimes have to admit where we are. We sometimes have to accept the help of others and look for the refuge. So I hope this was helpful to you tonight. Was to me. Steve said he's sending a whole lot of love to everybody here in Worldwide. Doug says Scotty is flying back to Louisiana tomorrow night, leaving his family for a while again. Yep. And it's for the betterment of my family. Yeah, it is. And you have to look at things. I love you too, Michelle. I love you all. All right, guys. That's all I got. So let's get out of here. I ran way over time. It's, oh my gosh, we're a half an hour overtime. Well, maybe I'm not as surprised at that as that sounded. I knew we were going to go long, especially after Rainey and the kids came in. I thought there goes about 20 minutes of my time, but I like bringing them in and I like sharing my family with y'all. So everybody, hey Marie, if I didn't say hello earlier, Slightly Slanted Sleuth, much love to you, sir, as well. Leslie, thank you. Safe travels. I'm sorry it was short too. I didn't get to spend enough time, but that'll come. All right. So guys, once again, it is that time where it is with a heavy heart that I have to say I will not be here tomorrow night because I'm arriving back in Houston tomorrow night to drive to Lake Charles, 2.5 hour drive. My son Sam is going to be picking me up at about 9 o'clock. So all of you, I'll see you again at the earliest. It will be Wednesday night. And I'm pretty sure we'll be on air by then. All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. You know what? Live long and prosper. Good night. I think it's good night. There we go. All right. Good night.
You're listening to the Intrepid radio program with Scotty Roberts. Intelligent talk.